Hello there. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made this beautiful black embroidery top for summer. I am going to show you how I started by drafting a pattern, making a mock-up, and through to how I constructed this top. So if you're interested, stick around. I start by drafting a pattern. After sketching up a couple options, I decided to go with a sleeveless A-line top. I rotated the shoulder dart into the waist dart of my bodice block, but instead of closing the dart, I will leave it open, which will give a nice A-line shape. Before cutting into the final fabric, I made a quick mock-up from an old sheet to make sure that I liked the design. I am not subjecting you to the audio portion of this video, as the mic that you ordered from Amazon does not improve the audio quality if you do not use it. In any case, making a mock-up is essential when drafting your own designs, as it's so hard to know how a flat pattern will look once it's sewn together. I have a bag of old sheets in my basement that I keep just for this purpose. In fact, I recommend making your initial mock-up in a really ugly, unwearable fabric because it gives you more freedom to try things out. Whenever I'm using a halfway decent fabric to do my mock-up, I'm more hesitant to try new things and cut into the fabric, which wastes time and creativity. When doing a mock-up, you usually want to use a fabric that is a similar weight and drape to your final fabric so you can get a realistic idea of how the garment will behave. But I'm not above making a couple mock-ups if necessary. From this toile, I can see that I want to bring the armhole up and in a bit, and I'm not liking the ties in the back, but would rather either keep the flaps open or close with a hook and eye. I end up going for the latter option. I made the toile a little shorter than my paper pattern, given the size of the scrap fabric I was using, but I actually preferred this length, and so I adapted it in the pattern. Here I'm laying out the pattern pieces on the fabric and deciding which designs I want to include and how the back panel pieces will look together. This took me a while because I wanted to optimize the beautiful flower designs. I also maximized the use of the scalloped edge of the fabric in the A-line design, which was one of the deciding factors for choosing that shape. All right, good morning. So I've got all of the pattern pieces cut out here, and now I'm just contemplating how to finish the seams. So typically on a garment like this, I would use a French seam, but because this has this thick embroidery done with a thicker rope, I am worried that French seam will be a bit too bulky. So I'm contemplating either unpicking some of the embroidery in the seam allowance, which would admittedly be a very tedious process and might damage the lightweight underlying fabric, which is just a lightweight cotton, or using bias binding. And I think as you can see, I decided to go with bias tape, which had the added benefit of giving the side seams a bit more structure, which accentuated the A-line shape. Bias tape worked well with this fabric, but I would not recommend it for a lighter fabric as it would give too much structure and make the fabric stand or crease weirdly. After finishing the side seams and center back with bias tape, I decided not to put bias tape on the shoulder seam because I did not want the extra bulk there. Instead, I finished the edges with an overlock stitch. After all the edges of all the panels were finished, it was time to sew the front and back panels together. The final step was to finish the armholes and neckline. To do this, I used the same bias tape cut down to 3 centimeters wide, which I ironed flat and then sewed right sides together to the armhole and neckline openings with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Next, I snipped the seam allowance around the curve to release tension, pressed the bias tape toward the seam allowance and understitched. Then I folded the end of the bias tape in by 1 centimeter to enclose the seam allowance and sewed in place from the right side of the garment a little less than 1 centimeter from the edge, ensuring that I caught the edge of the bias tape below. The last thing to do was to sew a hook and eye at the top of the back, and that's it. Here's the final look. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I love the drape of this fabric in the A-line shape, and the fabric itself is just gorgeous. Thank you for watching. Until next time.